This is a production of Cornell University.
Thanks everyone joining this is going to be episode 15 of the Cornell Turf Show this spring. We're excited to have a practitioner on today, Shawn Kister, Director of Grounds at Longwood Garden. Shawn, you've been a live viewer for all our spring episodes this year, so we're happy to have you on today to talk about your practical knowledge. Frank, we're getting a little bit out of the ivory tower here. We're going to talk to some boots on the ground, so we're excited to hear some of the really cool kind of sustainability initiatives, data collection initiatives that Shawn's got going at Longwood. So we'll transition into that conversation a little bit later.
I want to talk about the way you mow these things, because this has been a consistent point of discussion among people. Now, certainly in a formal garden like this, you see the striping. I remember when you built this beautiful little amphitheater there. This is just such a beautiful thing. For those folks that have never visited this spectacular piece of land, you got to get yourself down there to see the great work that Shawn's doing. I don't have any of the patterns there, Shawn, but I do have, some of the data that you collect, like when you start mowing, and you can see, it's very variable there. It looked like you were mowing earlier. It's something that varies a lot over time, but it is a piece of data. It looks like you're not mowing in some areas there for reasons. And of course, Dan talked about this at Cornell a number of weeks ago, where we've been doing it and promoting it for using less gas. I picked up this picture because I thought it was cool of you guys mowing with the fly mow. This is a lecture, I guess, you gave at Longwood not long ago. And here are the questions for today, pal. As you look at the 22 years managing 170 some odd acres there at Longwood, I'm sort of interested in how things have evolved over that time, and where you've made adjustments. Both, I know I want to hear a little bit about mowing. Certainly, I know we'll hear about watering. And then, as you've collected data, how's that helped? And then, a lot of people listening or tuning in, are wondering, well, that's really good. He's at Longwood. I don't know where to start, right? Where's a good entry point? So let me stop sharing and take a look at you and start with that first question. 22 years at a place like that. And I know, I guess we've known each other at least 15 of those years, interacting since you had me down there. Tell me what it's like, how it's changed over the years.
Well, thank you for having me on. I told Carl, this is like my TED Talk. So this is the rock stars of turf. So I appreciate it. So it's an evolution, right? I came here 22 years ago. I remember the day I drove up for my interview, coming off of Route 1, coming through the main entrance and thinking, this is very naive of me then, how easy it was going to be, because all I saw was yellow, meaning we had dandelions everywhere. And it was an evolution, because at that time and place, Longwood wanted to do everything they could sustainability-wise from a turf standpoint, and that meant we were not allowed to put broadleaf weed control down. So it had to do with picking the right species, making sure we get the soil in shape. So over time, by tracking information and having that data point, I then was allowed to have more tools given to me for my toolbox. So that didn't mean that, hey, Shawn, go out and buy your boom sprayer and start spraying. It's like, no. What areas is going to be affected by the display? What areas does the public? So I think you can see the image behind me. So this is one of the mowing patterns. It's really a brush pattern, right? We can't mow this. We do this like you do on a baseball field. We do it with brooms and water pressure. But we started asking, what can turf add to the display at Longwood? And more importantly, what can we do not to take away the display of our landscape managed areas, right? We call it the frame. It's the frame of the aesthetics that we have. And right. So don't detract from that.
So when you got there and it was all yellow, you didn't use any herbicides. It was a matter of systematically fixing the soil, putting the right species in, irrigating them properly. And so for how many years have you not used synthetic herbicides out there?
So we were not allowed to use any herbicides. Let's see, in 2004. So maybe the first 5 years here, we were not allowed to use any herbicides on the turf grass. And then we slowly opened it up and we said, okay, this is a high priority area. And so we have maps of all the gardens. And we said, okay, how about this area if we do one application in the fall to reduce the pressure? Mm-hmm. And then the other tool I used is I said, what message are we sending to the guests at Longwood about managing turf grass if we have, I mean, truly, some of the areas were 100% weeds. And so I used it. I said, well, turf is a great filter. I said, so we're allowing more runoff. We have bare ground in the wintertime. I said, this is the wrong message. And so it slowly got handed over. And so then we could do a little bit of broadleaf weeds. Then we could open up and do some aeration and overseeding. But when I first came here, Longwood has really good topsoil, but it was extremely, extremely high in magnesium. And so the soils were very tight. And so we put a lot of high cal lime down in gypsum to get our soils in shape. And now part of it is from your training of me, Frank, is we're now on a 5-year rotation for soil testing. We have the soils in such good shape now. We don't need to do them every year. Now, the one behind me, that's sand-based. So we do test that once a year. But it was just an evolution. It was getting my bosses comfortable with me. How was I going to manage things? And it all started with those data points. And once you have data points, then you can say, hey, we start mowing typically now. We need to have this many staff members. And so we slowly grew. We had 5 full-time turfgrass technicians. We're up to 7 full-time turfgrass technicians that we have. And so it's that evolution of learning things, learning what Longwood is about, learning the message we want to give to the guests. Because I'll be honest with you, there are guests that see behind me and they think I'm a nozzlehead. And we do not do that. I mean, and so that's part of our education too, that we do not, the turf behind me is not sprayed on a weekly basis. It does not have broadleaf weed control used all the time. You can do that if you get your soils in shape and you do the right strategies with things. And so that's part of our mission.
So little by little, you've had to adapt to allow certain things to, remove some shade issues, improve traffic flow. And I would imagine that was a big deal during COVID, that traffic created a stress maybe you hadn't seen in the same way. I don't know how you guys restricted during that time. But one of the things that it does make me wonder about is it is like an afterthought. I mean, most people are not thinking about, well, yeah, Shawn, okay, the grass, would you please cut it? If you cut it, it looks good. I mean, we get this a lot. Mowing solves a lot of weed problems because nobody notices them if they're not flowering until you bring it to their attention. Oh, we have bare ground. Oh, we have this. So I guess, again, we got a lot of people listening and might be saying, yeah, I can't even get them to pay attention to me. I can't even get them to realize what's happening. What were some of the earliest steps you took to say, hey, we got to fix this? And here, before you even embarked upon a plan, I feel like so many people can't get their own administrators' attention for these things, or their own bosses in a lawn care operation attention for these things. What advice would you give those folks?
Well, first it starts with, you got to be professional, right? That's the first thing. So I'm a stickler on terms, and I'll pick on my crew sometimes when they use it. It's not just turf, right? And we're not mowing guys. So they are turf grass technicians. They all have 4-year turf degrees. And I said, we're here to elevate that. I said, just like we have horticulturists here that have a lot of years experience, the same thing from turf. I said, so you have to look at it through that lens and communicate it through that lens, that you're not just out there mowing. So like, I'll have the hort team sometimes, they're like, you guys just mow. And I go, no, that's not what we do for things. Or they'll say, well, you can go get sod, right? Sod is like carpet. You buy it by the yard. So if something goes wrong, just go resod it. And I go, no, that's not our sustainability initiative. That's not what we're trying to do. We have that tool in our toolbox, but that shouldn't be our first gut feeling. We need to protect the turf, or we're going to set a stage up.
Okay.
We have to educate performing arts about this. So it's using those right terms, I think, Frank, to make sure that people realize you're elevating it up to what it should be. It shouldn't be the mow and blow guys. That's not who we have here at Longwood. And that's not who I selected.
Well, it's clear that what you've been able to do is communicate it, and it's clear that you've got a staff that can do it, but you've also had to make adjustments in equipment, in the way you do line trimming, are you under pressure for energy use? And then, to lead into my next question, have you raised the mowing height to mow less? Have you found areas where you mow them less frequently? And what does it take to manage that less frequently mowed area versus a regularly mowed manicured turf like behind you? Because I think a lot of people look at them, Shawn, and they say, oh yeah, well, they're not doing anything over there, right? They stop mowing, they're not doing anything, as if it's no management. And I wonder if you couldn't talk to us a little bit about what that looks like to manage a area you don't mow as much intentionally?
Sure. So that's a great question. So those of you who don't know, so Frank was part of our peer review group back in 2012. And one of the items that came out to us was, why are you mowing everything weekly? Right? Great question. So we took that to heart and we stopped mowing certain areas weekly. And Frank, I thought I communicated, I had maps, I had everything down. After 6 months, they're like, what are you doing?
That's right.
Said,
They're
well,
going to
remember
string
we
you
said
up.
we weren't going to mow these areas. And so we took it too far. So we had to peel it back. And so areas that I thought were no brainers of, these aren't going to be impacted by the guests, or the guest is going to, aesthetically, they didn't work. So we peeled that back. So probably about half of those areas that we took out, and there was probably about 3 acres worth of turf where we said, we'll just mow monthly, right? We'll take it down. What we learned too early on is if you stop mowing, you're going to have weeds that come in. So you make sure you stay on top of it. So we do make sure we go through with a pre-emergent, and we do a broadleaf weed control now as needed for those areas. But there are areas now that we're probably down about 1.5 acres that we only mow once a month now, that we've gotten to that aesthetic. And the other one, we use it as a tool. So one of them is in our grass overflow parking lot. What better way to keep security and other people from putting a car in an area than having the tall grass? And so instead of putting a fence up that they could take down, or a string line, we now have it up so they know if they can't go in it, right? Because nobody's going to park a car in it. So we use that as another tool in our toolbox for this. But you're absolutely right. It was a learning curve. We thought we were doing the right thing. I thought I was doing the right thing, but it just didn't fit with our aesthetics. And so being a public garden, you always have to keep that in the back of your mind, that it's that balancing act between what are you doing input wise for turf grass to the aesthetic part that the guest is not going to be discouraged by. But we also did a trial in the gardens with Penn State University about using different fine fescues, hard fescues, things like that. It was one of the best trials we ever did. It was front and center. We had information on it. I don't know how much playtime I got off of that by guests asking me, as well as other people outside of Longwood asking me, what did you learn? How did you do things? And there's a local golf course down the road that learned from it, and they did hard fescue along their road edges, and they don't mow them now. And they're like, we learned this by seeing your trial. So it was just a great offshoot that we did, but it all started with, I'm very curious by nature. I want to know, I want data to back it up, right? I don't want to do a knee-jerk reaction and do a well thought out plan for things. The other misnomer too, being at Longwood, is people think we have unlimited resources. Granted, we have very good resources. We do not have unlimited resources, right? So we have to be smart about it for things. Now, going back to COVID, Frank,
yeah, go ahead.
We unfortunately, I don't know how it was in New York, so we were put in the bucket of casinos and movie theaters. So we were closed for 2.5 months. So we were an outdoor venue that was told we had to close until we could get to the green phase. So PA did red, yellow, green. We couldn't even open in yellow. So it was the most disheartening thing to know that we have 1,077 acres, 350 which is open outdoors. We could not let a guest inside. It was heartbreaking. We're working on that now because it's part of an education. We need to educate our government about what Longwood is about. But from a knee-jerk reaction, they put us in the wrong bucket and we had to stay closed. And it was heartbreaking to see in the spring, one of our best spring displays ever, our 1,000 tulips that came up, our geophyte display. Nobody could see them. And so we had to go through that. But once again, it was a learning lesson for all of us.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, listen, one of the things it forced a lot of people to realize, and there's 2 things I want to go back with you about. One is to the mowing thing and the weed control issue, because it's real. And what you describe is exactly a lot of times what golf courses have to do with these naturalized areas on the property, where they have weeds that come in, they've got to use pre or post emergent products to keep the weeds out. So that pretty much, I think over time, you'd like to think you don't have to spray a pre year, or sedge doesn't become a problem. You can't get away with it, can you?
No, not true. Not true. We have not hit that sweet spot where we can skip that.
Okay. All right. So that's the first thing. That the first thing there, what was the second thing we were talking about? The fine fescues along the road, slow growing.
Yep.
The use of data over time. That was the transition I wanted to make. Thank you very much for bringing up data. You say you had data points. You must have people above you who understand data, some idea data, and have understood it for a while. Saying like you've been at it for the last 15, 20 years. How do you start that? Is it simple numbers and, simple things like the first time we start mowing? That's something good. We should know that and track that. How do you decide what date is good to take and what can be made of?
Well, a lot of it comes back to Frank, our budgets. And so by having like our start mowing date, I can say, if we're going to contract out an area, I know historically it's going to take 26 cuts a year, right? Or if the growing season is longer, I say, hey, to our accountant, this is why it costs me 2 extra cuts, right? The growing season, the temperature was this. So by having that data, you have to justify everything that we do now. Just about all of our species of turf here, we do turf type tall fescue. We look at the NTEP trials. We look at the best ones. And our mowing height, to your point, is we mow at 3 to 3.5 inches. So we mow taller, right? We could probably go down to 2.5 inches, but I say, why? Like, why are we doing that? Going back to, we want the guests to leave and say, well, if Longwood's doing it, right, I can do this at my home lawn. I don't need to be doing that, right? We're constantly learning. We're constantly giving out that education to them. So we can hopefully change that perception and change the image. Like, quite frankly, something's got to change. I mean, you brought it up, the 5-in-1. I love going to Home Depot and seeing stuff like that, and I laugh. I'm like,
oh, please. Well, listen, this is what the grassroots exhibit at the National Arboretum was going to try to do a while ago. I'm so glad to see you committed to that. And Carl, how about some questions? Are there any questions or comments you have for Shawn?
Yeah, so I think one of the things you mentioned, Frank, is for some of the people listening who have very few resources and are trying to communicate to their bosses. Shawn, I hear you talking a lot about how you had to kind of scale up your resources when you started at Longwood, kind of identifying, so you're starting with these data points, and then you're kind of scaling up based on priorities. You talked about varieties, you talked about soils. How important is it when you first go to your boss and start talking about, hey, I need some more resources? How important is it to prioritize and try and scale, create a plan to scale up when you go into that first sort of conversation with with the people above?
No, absolutely. I mean, you have to have your vision, right? So you say, this is where we're at. This is where I want to get. These are the steps that it's going to take incrementally to get there. And so the first step for me was, hey, we're mowing everything the right way. We have the right species in here. The soil's where it needs to be. How about we have this next tool and we start prioritizing where that tool is going to be used, right? So it's not you're asking for a significant amount of dollars. It's a little bit, right? And then we got some savings. The one item I didn't mention is we used to use all organic fertilizer here, and we went away from that. And so now we only put down fertilizer in the fall. We use a slow release product called Duration, and that cut our fertility in half. So I had a huge labor savings from that, as well as a product savings that I could then roll and say, hey, I'm doing this sustainable item. How about I use those dollars for this other tool that I need? And it's all about that. And luckily at Longwood, we're all on the same page in terms of our vision. We want to elevate, we want to do things, but we want to keep it in a sustainable way. And once you do that, you can do it. The stuff behind me, right, that didn't happen overnight. That wasn't year 5. That wasn't year 10. That was much longer. That was me pushing my folks to keep them engaged and to keep them wanting to do more. I'm like, can we do this, right? And the pattern behind me is one of our senior turf grass technicians. He took it to heart, and he's been doing this for 5 years now. And he comes up with all this himself. And I just stand back and go, wow, that's amazing. It's amazing what we did.
I'm wondering, Shawn, when you didn't get the visitors and it was just you guys doing the work, did you notice bad habits about the way you guys moved around the garden? Are there some places you drive mowers, like on golf courses, everybody drives? A lot of people were shut down and they could, there was no golfers to complain about. It's like, oh, look, the area is still dead. Maybe it's us. Did you get a look at some of the things that you do through a lens that you hadn't seen before and make some adjustments based on that?
So when it first shut us down, which was March 13th, not only did it shut the guests down, from a staffing standpoint, we prioritized. So we were just gearing up to start mowing, and we were told nobody that was not essential. So I could come to work. My team couldn't come to work for the first week. So I'm sitting here sweating bullets going, if we don't get them here, we're going to have a hayfield. And then I had to tell them the unfortunate news, which I repeated to them. I said, you will never hear me use these words again. I said, but due to the pandemic, just mow the grass. I said, you just need to keep it maintained. I said, don't worry about string trimming. Don't worry about edging. I said, because we didn't know what our staffing level was going to be given it. I mean, if you recall back, we truly thought the sky was falling. We didn't know what was, so we told everybody, stay away, come here. The guys literally came in for 2 or 3 days a week and they just cut. It's like, just cut it, just cut it, just cut it. And that was the same point too, where the conservatories that we have, we had to start making hard decisions because we were gearing up for the next display, right? What do? We have a greenhouse full of crops. Well, the next one is coming in. What do we do? And so we had a lot of heart-wrenching decisions to make about the compost stream and where these plants were going. And but we all got through it. And so it just goes back to communication. But
did you notice any negative effects from having to let it grow, or did it get out of hand to the point where you violated the 1/3 rule, and did the grass get weakened a little bit?
So we violate the 1/3 rule. So it was interesting. We have 5 million geophytes in turf grass locations. So if you want to have an area not to mow, which is not, I'm not suggesting this, you're going to violate the 1/3 rule. And so the grass will turn brown. It will look unsightly. It will be weedy for a while. And we're learning through that as well. But absolutely, Frank, there were areas that, as you're not as bad as the image you showed, but we definitely were making some hay in some areas. But we caught up. I mean, we just did what we normally do. We caught up, and the turf responded, and we're back to pretty much normal from that standpoint, at least for this year.
Well, we're getting close to wrapping up, Shawn, and I just want to ask you one more thing, because it is a pressing issue, and you are seeming to take a lead in communicating things. How are you talking to the people who you've been around for 20 something years about how the climate's changing and how it's impacting what you're doing? And I'm assuming you're noticing it. I thought your start date thing was a little bit interesting, but tell me how you're even having that conversation with people in the garden.
So absolutely. So I'm also responsible for the arborist team. And so the nursery woody plant production team. So we've started that, Frank, from the tree side, where we know now we have climate change models that the Forestry Service worked with us on. And so we have a 100-year model that'll tell you which species are going to be declining in habitat, increasing. And so when we go to put a tree back, we now use that model to do it. And we also have a specimen tree replacement plan to preserve our historic trees. So we unfortunately, right when that pandemic started, 180-year historical cucumber magnolia, national champion cucumber magnolia uprooted. We luckily 15 years ago had a cutting from that tree. And so we've replanted that tree in kind to preserve it. We call it keeping our hand on our founder's shoulder. And so preserving the past to move forward. And so we have a genetic replica now that'll be tethered to that historic tree, knowing that we've kept the genetics alive. So we're all over it now.
I am so glad I asked that question, Carl. Aren't you glad I asked that question? Shawn, what a joy having you, pal. It's so great to see you. And thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. I'll look forward to doing this again when we're talking watering, because that stuff that you're doing is really worth everybody hearing about. Thanks a lot, Shawn. Carl, it's all yours, brother.
Yep, as always, Shawn, that was awesome. It's great to hear what you guys are doing at Longwood. So for our listeners, viewers, Longwood Gardens down there in Pennsylvania, to go check it out. If you're not watching, the visuals behind Shawn that he's got of those aesthetics of the turf areas are pretty cool. So I appreciate you coming on, Shawn. We'll see everybody next week. Our Thursday golf show, we'll have Jim Brosnan on from Tennessee. We'll be talking some weed stuff. Always exciting. But until then, take it easy, everybody. See you guys next week.
Shawn. Thanks so much.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.